A new study out shows the wealthiest households in the country are actually way more responsible for climate change than the average household. So now this is according to a study published on Thursday in PLOS Climate. The richest 10% of U.S. households are responsible for over 40% of the nation's total greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to explain how they work that out in a minute. But first, right now, a lot of the politicians, a lot of the government is pushing for the average person to make more with less, right? To use things like paper straws, which are annoying, when in reality, the problem turns out is not actually working people, it's rich people. Super rich people, especially. Now, the study found the top 1% alone accounted for more than, for between 15 and 17% of total emissions. So now, how is this possible? Well, the study's authors took into account their investments. So investments, where they put their money, really kind of important. So obviously, rich people have more investments. Middle class might have things like, 401ks, IRAs, and things like that, savings accounts, etc. They pale in comparison to the level of investments owned by rich people. So now, rich people, since they have more of these investments, they have more of an impact on the climate if their investments happen to be heavily into fossil fuels. Okay? And so now, according to lead author Jared Starr, he said that looking at their household income and investments allowed researchers to examine how income-generating methods contributed to the climate crisis rather than just focus on the consumption, because it paints an incomplete picture, which actually is pretty regressive and blames the average people, average workers, average Americans for the climate crisis, when in reality, again, it's corporations and incredibly wealthy people, including people who are investing. In fact, here's what Starr said. Consumption-based approaches to limiting greenhouse gas emissions are regressive. They disproportionately punish the poor while having little impact on the extremely wealthy, who tend to save and invest a large share of their income. Consumption-based approaches miss something important. Carbon pollution generates income, but when that income is reinvested into stocks, rather than spent on necessities, it isn't subject to a consumption-based carbon tax. So now this approach, again, is pretty different than other approaches in the past because, again, it doesn't really pin the focus on average people for climate change. Now, that's unfortunately been the narrative for quite some time. Hey, average person, you need to change your life for climate change. Cut down on this. Go vegan. Meatless Mondays. Do more recycling. Use paper straw. By the way, all those things are good things, and I'm not saying don't do that. If you can, great. If you want to, great. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to do a lot. In fact, the study found, and this is going to blow your mind, that just 15 days of income for the top 0.1% household generates as much carbon pollution as a lifetime of income for a household in the bottom 10%. So if you are very poor, rich people will generate more carbon in 15 days than your entire life. That is the reality. And yet, the message that we see in a lot of corporate media is, oh, average person, you're at fault for climate change because you had a steak. You had a hamburger the other day. And understand, the messaging here is very, very good for conservatives. They're able to grab that and say, oh, look at that. You see, it's these rich people. They're going to Davos, right? And they're flying around their private jets. And they're telling you not to eat a hamburger. Well, again, that kind of messaging is very, very effective. It actually turns well-meaning people away from doing anything about the climate. I mean, look at the most recent fake outrage about gas stoves. Remember, Fox News ran segment after segment. Joe Biden, he's going to kick down your door and take your gas stove. In reality, most Americans don't have gas stoves. 38% of them do. Most of them are actually businesses. So, nonetheless, they ran with that. People were mad. Oh, you're going to take my gas stove over my dead body, or my cold dead hands. But wait, most people don't anyway. That's how conservative message is so effective on the climate. I mean, think of another example, right? Think of somebody telling you that, hey, you really shouldn't drive your car to work because of the emissions when you live half an hour away, while having no options when it comes to things like public transportation. It's both safe and reliable. You don't have that in your area because, oh, the government didn't invest in that. And so maybe they do have public transportation, but that's slow, unreliable, kind of smells bad. You know, you're not going to want to do that. You're like, no, I want to get to work on time and not deal with smelly people. And if you're a woman, not want to deal with the possibility of sexual assault on public transportation. And so let's be honest, right? Those are concerns. And so if you're going around, you know, or if you have well-meaning liberals, for example, especially wealthy ones, going around and telling people, you shouldn't drive. You know, those all those emissions, right? You shouldn't drive. Well, that's going to put people off. Understand that, you know, half of this is about messaging. Because again, when you ask people, of course, most people are going to care about the climate. But again, you also have to be reasonable in what you ask people to do, as well as focusing on the real problem here. And that's incredibly wealthy corporations and rich people that are doing the most polluting. So, look, I'm not saying that, by the way, everybody on the left is doing that. No. But if you watch right-wing media, again, they create this narrative, and they do it very, very well, that the left is coming for your hamburger in order to fight climate change. Totally not true. Totally not real. And totally a great way to distract from the fact that the rich people, the richest Americans, are actually the most at fault. Which is why I'm so glad to see Starr flipping the script and asking, quote, what happens when we focused on how emissions create income rather than how they enable consumption? And when he does that, you end up getting a better picture here of how it generally tends to be the rich who screw us all. Now, that study looked at 30 years of data to determine how investments can support direct and indirect emissions. Study authors examined investment income from a power plant, for instance, which produces emissions both the power plant and downstream in the supply chain. The higher the income bracket, the higher proportion of emissions that comes from the investment income, the study finds. Researchers also looked at the group they categorized as super emitters, who create an extremely high amount of emissions per household. They found that almost all super emitters were from the top 0.1% of household incomes. Now, you know who I immediately thought of when I heard super emitter. Joe frickin' Manchin. Joe Manchin, Democrat, by the way, from West Virginia, he not only owned a coal company, he's also massively invested in it. He gets an annual income far larger than his congressional salary from those investments. He is a super emitter, and you're not going to be surprised what he votes against. Reducing emissions from power plants, of course. He fights all of the climate agenda. In fact, all these people who are invested in fossil fuels also likely donate to right-wing politicians like, you know, Republicans and conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin and Henry Cuellar, and they do so because of a return on investment. And look, and they get that investment, by the way. Not only that, but even so-called liberal investors, they could have investments in fossil fuels, oil, natural gas. This is your, you know, limousine liberal. They'll be the same ones that are telling us, working people, that you've got to give up this and that for the climate. No, but it's not our fault. It's you guys. We don't have, the average people do not have enough power to make these changes alone. Yes, they can do meatless Mondays and, you know, drink everything from a paper straw. That's not going to make the biggest difference. And I, for one, am pretty sick and tired of being told that we need to give up things when rich people use their private jets and they make money from dirty investments. I will say one thing. There are conservatives that actually do have a point when they point out, like, oh, look at these rich people flying around in their private jets and talking about climate change. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. Guess what? These are the you know, very, very rich people who contribute a lot of emissions. And yes, we do need to shut that down. We do need to do that, but it's not just the private jets. It is what they are invested in that is the big issue. If they if they were, forced to divest from fossil fuels and invest in cleaner energy sources, that would make a world of difference. A world of difference. No. So now, look, how do we get them to change that? Because it's obvious what the problem is. Well, for one, I think ending congressional stock trades would be a huge, huge thing. Now, why is that? Well, again, you have members of Congress, a majority of them, that have investments in the stock market, which include investments in dirty fossil fuels. So you end that, and already that ends, for example, Joe Manchin is not going to get all of his money from these coal companies he has. Sad day for you, Joe Manchin. You're going to have to divest, and you're actually not going to have to, you're not going to be able to represent yourself and enrich yourself using your position. No, you're not allowed to do that. You're supposed to serve the people of West Virginia, and you're not doing that. You're serving yourself and enriching yourself off of them and actually making their environment worse. So, yes, we have to end those congressional stock trades, but not just that. But overall, we need the goal of getting money out of politics. All corporate money, all union money, all money. Just get all private money out. Because until we do that, corporations and wealthy donors will continue to contribute to the problem, which, again, is policy. They contribute to these politicians who make policy. And of course, when somebody's paying you, making sure that, you will win your next election through advertising, because that's where a lot of these campaign donations actually go, advertising, so that people will show up and vote for you in that next election and allow you to essentially keep your job. Again, these companies don't do this out of the kindness of their own hearts. They expect a return on investment. That return on investment is access. There's lobbying involved, and that lobbying, very influential, because it's basically one of those, hey, we're really interested in this piece of legislation, or we're really interested in what you can do to help our industry while you're in office. And so, you might want to make sure to vote against any excessive regulations, maybe lower taxes a bit, just to ensure that you'll have our support in the next election. Or we supported you quite a bit during your first election. So, you might want to think about some of the stuff you vote for and against. That's how it works. So, no, you've got to end that. You've got to end the corruption of money in politics, because if you don't, nothing's ever going to change. They will continue to contribute to the problem while putting the blame on you and I, average people. And that's even, by the way, if some of these politicians publicly acknowledge the realities of climate change, where, look, on the Republican side, they don't. And on the Democratic side, they might, but still, in a lot of cases, like I said, Cuellar and Manchin, two very, very big examples, are contributing to the problem while giving lip service to solutions. Now, end the corruption, and you can actually protect the climate.